1 of your notes here. The books of 1st and 2nd Kings, well, they're called that because they summarize the lives of the kings from Solomon all the way through both the divided kingdoms, including all the kings of both Israel and Judah. Israel and Judah. That's the first filling we have there. Now, together, they cover about 4 centuries. Isn't that amazing? We can cover 400 years tonight in about 30 minutes. And that stop and think about that. Now, that's almost twice as long as America's been a nation. Now, go back and think, that's also how long the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, or down there in Egypt, 400 years. They weren't slaves the entire time, but for most of that time. So we're a young country in comparison. But these 2 books, they cover the rise and the fall of the kingdoms, is detailed here. Last week we covered 1 Kings, and that summarized the reign of Solomon and the division of the king when Rehoboam succeeded Solomon as king, and the northern kingdom seceded. Here in America, it was a southern kingdom that seceded during the Civil War, but it was the northern that pulled away from the southern back in the division of Israel. And 2 Kings summarizes events of each of the various kings of the 2 kingdoms, as well as pointing out the specific prophecies of 2 of the 30 prophets that are named there. The major voices were Elijah and Elisha. Have you noticed there are no books of prophecy named after Elijah and Elisha? But they're covered here, along with the kings. They were that important in the lives of those nations to be listed along with the kings. In 2 Kings, we read about, it sounds like in many places a description of the United States of America. We've got evil leaders, rampant idolatry, and a complacent church, not getting up off its hind end and getting out and doing what the Lord told us we ought to be going and doing. So the pressure, they had a lot of pressure to conform, to turn from the Lord and just serve themselves. But I want to introduce the word here. In the notes, it says there was a minority of chosen people moved the opposite direction toward God rather than away from God. This group we call a remnant. God has always preserved a remnant of people through whom he worked and brought things back to where they should be. Now, we're going to, in fact, Sunday, Easter Sunday, we'll be talking about the Easter remnant. Okay, and but that's, I think we are a part of a remnant today, that we are the hope that for our country. And there are scattered parts of that remnant all over the place, and we need to be praying that God will help us connect the dots and that we can stand firm. Y'all, this week in the lamestream press, they have really been slamming the church and Christianity. We're haters. You know, it's hate speech, talking about transphobe and calling us transphobes. And, you know, when they have no other thing, they just want to start calling people names and putting them down. And that's not a good thing. Are the Bethel prophets, Elijah and Elisha, as well as 2 righteous kings. There are only 2 kings in the book of 2 Kings that God says were good kings. They spoke God's word. They stood for him. So watch those individuals when you read through, as you read through there. We find the strength and the force of Elijah, and we find out how human he was when he ran from Jezebel, but God brought him back. And then he apprenticed Elisha there. But the 2 kings were Hezekiah and Josiah. Hezekiah and Josiah. And We want to be like them. We want to swim against the current of common acceptance, like a salmon going upstream. Have y'all ever seen salmon swimming upstream? Have you ever seen them like jumping a salmon ladder going up? That's a fantastic thing. Shane's headed over there where some of the best salmon fishing in the eastern hemisphere, in the western hemisphere is, other than in the North Pacific. They have them in the North Atlantic too. But okay, going on. 2 Kings continues the history of Israel. Starts with, and 2 Kings is halfway between the death of David and the death of the nation itself. Israel had been divided. We saw that in 1 Kings 12. And both kingdoms began sliding down a slippery slope toward idolatry and corruption. And ultimately, they collapsed and wound up in captivity. 2 Kings relates the sordid stories of 12 kings of the northern kingdom, Israel, and the 16 kings of the southern kingdom that was called Judah. 16 kings of the southern. The northern part, Israel was conquered by Shalmaneser of Assyria. They went into captivity in 722 BC. You know, they're even changing the way they date things. It's going to be the Common Era. No, we're just going to say before Christ and Anno Domini, AD, the year of our Lord. We'll just keep it that way, okay? They call it what they want to. We'll speak truth, okay? We'll speak truth. It's always fascinated me that people, even the people that deny God, date everything based upon the Lord Jesus. I think that's just ironic and fun and good, you know. Okay, so now the southern kingdom, okay, let's see. Of all the kings, in both the north and the south, only two, Hezekiah and Josiah, were called good. They obeyed God. Hezekiah even had people going around holding Bible studies in all the towns and everything. It was a great thing that he did. And God blessed him because of that. Now, because they obeyed God and because of the revivals that they had during their reigns, Judah stood for an additional 136 years after Israel was gone. They were finally conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in 586 BC. 586 BC for them. Now, the Bible mentions 30 prophets. 30 prophets. And when God was going to do something, he always let the prophets know ahead of time, and they went to proclaim it. They pointed fingers and called names, just like it's supposed to be. And 30 prophets. Most notable of those were Elijah and Elisha. As Elijah neared the end of his earthly ministry, he asked Elisha, said, I'm probably going to leave you today. God's got something coming up. I don't know exactly what to expect, but I know he's got something. And God had let them know, like he let the prophets know what was going on. Every little town they went through, from Dothan to Jericho and around, they let him know. You know that Elijah's going to be taken up today, right? Yes, I know. But Elisha tried to leave him behind. He said, no, I'm going with you. He said, well, what do you want? He said, I want a double portion of your spirit. He said, well, if you see me when God takes me up, then I believe you'll have it. And sure enough, he got the double portion. In chapter 12, verse 9, here's where he asked for that. Soon after that, now, we sing, swing low, sweet chariot. But the chariot did not come to carry Elijah home. The chariot came and drove between the two of them and separated them. And then what the old folks used to call a tornado came down and got Elijah and took him up in a whirlwind. He went up in a whirlwind. And his cloak, his mantle fell down that he wore over his shoulders there. Elisha picked it up. Now, one of the last things that happened, they came to the Jordan River. Elijah took and folded his mantle up, and he went, whack, dropped it down on the water, and that river parted, and they walked across on dry land. They watched while going down the road by the riverside when the fiery chariot came down and the tornado got him and the whirlwind got him and took him up. So he picked up the mantle, Elisha did, and he started heading back because the other prophets were standing over on the hillside watching all that. He rolled the mantle up and he hit the river and it parted and he went back across it on dry land. So he knew he had gotten that double portion of Elijah's spirit. That's how he knew that. So now Elisha became God's spokesman to the northern kingdom of Israel. He's the first one to establish a seminary. He was training other prophets. We're going to take a look at their miracles that they did. Elisha actually accomplished more miracles than Elijah did. Elijah's were more spectacular. Now, let's look at the themes on page 2. We only have 4 pages tonight instead of 6. But the first theme is Elisha. And the purpose of his ministry was to restore respect to God and to God's word. He stood firmly against the evil kings of Israel. He was very courageous. He was not only a prophet, he was a seer. God revealed things to Elisha that nobody else would have known. And the enemy king, every time he tried to set an ambush for the king of Judah and to capture him, take him down, the king knew where they were going to be set up. And he could never. He said, the king got all of his guys together. The enemy king got them together. Said, one of y'all is telling one of you's a spy. And one of them said, no. Said, Elisha's telling him everything. He can tell the king what y'all talk about in the bedroom. And it's so cool. So he said, well, where is he? We'll get him. And Elisha was staying in Dothan then, not Alabama, but Dothan in Judah. And they got up in the morning and went outside, and Elisha's aide looked around, and the enemy had the whole city surrounded. Y'all know how John wrote and said to you and me, we shouldn't be afraid because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. He showed it to Elisha's day because Elisha told him, says, don't be worried. God has more troops in place than they do. And he said, Lord, show him. Because Elisha could see all the fiery chariots of God. They were surrounding the enemy army. So they came down and Elisha said, y'all are in the wrong place. And God made them blind to where they were. And Elisha asked him, said, would you like me to carry you to where the king is? Sure. Would you do that? So he carried him right in downtown where the king was. The king says, Elisha, what am I supposed to do? Kill them all? He said, no. Feed them all and send them back home. And they did. Love your enemies and prepare food for them, right? They did and set them free. And they all got carry out to carry home too. They loaded them up with gifts to take home with them. It's some fantastic. Y'all got to read that if you hadn't now. Read it. Talking about Elisha now. Okay, the second big theme is idolatry. Idolatry. Every evil king in both Israel and Judah encouraged idolatry. Every one. They were worshiping Baal and all kinds of stuff like that. These false gods represented war, cruelty, power, and sex. They had the sex and religion shrines all over the place. They had temple prostitutes working every little town. All kind of stuff going on there. And the kings sought priests and prophets whom they could manipulate in their own advantage. They tried to get Micah. Micah was one that Ahab tried to get to tell the same thing. He didn't like Ahab because Ahab told him the truth. He wouldn't tell him what he wanted to hear. But, now, They had 10 gods. They had wooden gods. They had gold-plated wooden gods and tin-plated wooden gods and stuff like that. And cast gods out of metal like bronze and things. But y'all, an idol can be any idea, ability, possession, or person that we put up on a higher level than God. Then it is an idol. If you love sports more than you love the Lord, you got a problem. You got an idol there. If you love food or possessions or anything else more than you love God, you have an idol in your life and it needs to be addressed. Those who believe in God must resist the lure of these attractive idols. Now, third one, evil kings and good kings. Only 20% of Israel and Judah's kings followed God. The evil kings were short-sighted. Some of them didn't last but 3 months or less. One lasted even less than that. They thought they could control their nation's destinies by importing other religions. They formed alliances with pagan nations, all kind of stuff. The good kings had to spend most of their time undoing the bad stuff. Like a surgeon who has to correct another surgeon. He says, I spent all my time doing revisions of other bad work, there. But the evil kings led the people into sin. The priests, the princes, the heads of families, and military leaders, they all had to cooperate or get executed. So, y'all, we cannot discharge our responsibility to obey God by blaming our leaders. You and I are responsible for what we do ourselves. And God's going to hold us accountable for our own personal behavior there. Okay, the fourth great theme there is God's patience. God's patience. God told his people if they would obey him, they would live successfully. If they disobeyed, they would be judged and destroyed. And he kept his word. Now think about it. We're talking 400 years, up and down, up and down, up and down. God put up with this. He's a very, very patient God. But he's not going to keep on and keeping on. But even God's patience has its limits. He gave ample warnings. Y'all, we have warnings in our word. We have prophecies that we're seeing fulfilled before our very eyes around us now that tells me it ain't going to be long. And things are going to be over. God is very patient with us. He gives us many, many chances to hear his message, to turn from sin, to believe him, and be obedient. That's the key thing. Be obedient. Obey God. All right, then the fifth thing is judgment. If you don't obey God, you're going to face judgment. After King Solomon's reign, Israel lasted 209 years before the Assyrians destroyed it. Judah lasted 345 years before the Babylonians took Jerusalem. God warned them and he warned them and he warned them and he warned them again. Sent 30 different prophets with the messages. God used these evil nations as instruments for his justice. And then they were judged because they exceeded what they should have done later. The consequences of rejecting God's commands and purpose for our lives are severe. I was reading this morning in the book of Revelation when the 7 bowls of God's wrath were poured out, the 7 bowl judgments, talking about 100-pound hailstones coming down, crushing people, and an earthquake that just pretty well leveled the whole world. So we got that coming. I pray we won't be here. We'll be done raptured up to heaven to be with the Lord. Okay, now let's look on page 3, the miracles. We got a table of miracles here of Elijah and Elisha. Okay, we look at Elijah first. First was food bought by ravens. 1 Kings 17, 5 and 6. Food bought by the ravens. Now, Elijah was sent to the wilderness, lay down by the stream there and was sleeping, and God sent him food to eat brought by blackbirds, ravens. Then the second miracle was the widow's food multiplied. Now, later on in the New Testament, one of the preachers was telling the Sanhedrin, made them mad, but even in the day of Elijah, there were many, 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 many widows suffering in the drought, the famine, And God only provided food for one, and she wasn't a Jew. She was a Gentile. It's so cool. This lady, everything, she was about to die. She had a little bit of grain, a meal or flour, and a little bit of oil to make some cornbread or bread. And she and her son, she's a widow with a son, and they were out gathering up some wood to build a fire to cook it on. When Elijah showed up, he said, "Can you give me something to drink and something to eat?" She said, "Well, I got some water you can have, but I hadn't got enough food but for me and my boy here." He said, "Well, you fix me some first, and then there'll be some left for y'all." Do you know, for months, that lady cooked every day, and there was always just enough to make a loaf of bread. Just enough every time to make a loaf of bread, as long as Elijah was there. And then the boy died. So the widow's food multiplied was the second one. The third one is the widow's son raised to life. Now, all this is going on in the 17th chapter of 1 Kings. The boy died. Elijah placed him up on his bed there, stretched out on him, and prayed for him. And God brought him back to life, and he gave him back to his mama. So then Elijah went back after 3 years. 3 years. Elijah went back, and the altar and sacrifice were consumed. This is a standoff against the Baal priest. When that happened. So fire and water were involved in that. Then Ahaziah's soldiers were consumed. Ahaziah was trying to summon Elijah, and he sent a troop, a platoon out there with 50 soldiers and their captain. They said, "The king said for you to come down, Elijah, come on." He said, "Man of God," he called it. He said, "If I'm a man of God, may fire come down and get y'all." They were incinerated. That happened like 3 times. The 4th time he sent somebody out there to get him. The captain got on his knees and said, "Elijah, please. Now have mercy on me and my men here. Would you please, sir, would you mind coming with us?" He said, "Well, since you said it nicely like that, I'll go with you." And they were gone. Then we told you about the Jordan River being parted. That was the next one. And then he was taken up to heaven in the whirlwind, transported to heaven. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miracles there. Elisha was a more studious like guy there. So he parted the Jordan River. He started where Elijah left off, parting the water. This is in 2 Kings chapter 2. And then the spring was purified at Jericho. On his way back, they got to Jericho there, and they said, "We can't drink any of the water." God showed him what to do. I think it was a bowl of salt he put in the water there, and it purified the water. It's been good ever since. Jericho's still got good water. And then he multiplied the widow's oil. This widow, another widow woman, and oil. Okay, this shows you how important olive oil is. Now, she was about to be, her sons were going to be taken because her husband died and she owed a debt of some sort. They were going to take her sons and sell them as slaves to pay off her debt. He said, "What have you got in the house?" She said, "Well, I got just a little bit of oil." He said, "You get every empty vessel you can from all your neighbors, and you fill them up. You start filling." So that little thing of oil, she didn't make any bread right then. I'm sure she made plenty later. But she started filling up jugs. She filled up cans. She filled up buckets. She filled up jugs. She filled up jars until everything in the house had jars full of oil. She said, "Give me another one. I got some more to pour up." They said, "Mama, they're all full." Elisha said, "Now sell it." So she opened up an oil stand at the market and sold all that oil and paid off all the debts, and they didn't have to worry about anything else. God provided for them. Then a dead boy was raised to life. This woman and her husband, she was childless. She and her husband showed mercy. Elisha was traveling around preaching at different places. When he came by there with his slave or his servant, they would stop by and visit with them. And she had her husband build a room for him, like a little pit suite up on top of the house there. And they stayed there. And he said, what could we do? Would you like me to put in a good word? Were you with the king? No, sir, we have everything. We just don't have any kids. He said, so he prayed for her. She got pregnant and had a son. And later that son died. And Elisha went back and God raised him. That woman's son, the dead boy, was raised to life. He was restored. Now then, they had a whole bunch of young prophets in training there at the seminary. And this was during a famine that was going on. And they were trying to feed everybody. And somebody went out and got a bunch of gourd-like things and cut them up and they were making a big pot of stew. It was just like, whatever you could get wasn't a stew. Kind of like some people's Brunswick stew that's got squirrels and raccoons and everything in it. They throwed everything in there. Well, it was poisoned. And they said, oh, Master, there's death in the pot. So God showed him what to do, and he added another ingredient that canceled that all out, and they all had a real good supper. And then Naaman was healed of leprosy. The king of the Syrian army, they had taken a little Jewish girl captive, and she told him about Elisha. The general, Naaman, had leprosy, and the king told him to go down there. He took gifts with him and everything. Elisha didn't even go out there and answer the door. He sent a servant out there to get him, see what he wanted. He came back in and told him that he wants you to come heal him of leprosy. He said, tell him to go dip himself in the Jordan River 7 times. Now you talk about sending a servant to tell a general, go duck yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. Y'all know how muddy the Jordan River is. It's seriously muddy. And that's what the general said. We got better rivers than that back home. I figured he'd come out and wave his hand or do something and some miracle and heal me. They said, hey, general, look, just try it. Just try it. He went and he did it. He didn't want to do it, but he did it. See, this shows you how important it is to obey God. He went and ducked himself 7 times, and y'all, the leprosy was gone. They said his flesh was like that of a newborn baby. Ladies, how'd you like to have a beauty treatment like that now? Wouldn't that be good? And he went back and tried to give gifts to them. They wouldn't take them. And then Gehazi, was Elisha's servant. He thought, I can't believe he's letting him get away. He's got camel loads of stuff. So he waited just a minute until the army people, the detail was leaving with taking all the gifts back with him. He ran out there. He said, wait a minute, we just had 2 of the young servants, young prophets come in. We need some clothes and stuff. He said, well, man, here, take this and take a sack full of silver with you too. And they went on back to Gehazi, took that, put it in his room. He got corrupted by greed. He went back down. Elisha says, where you been? Oh, nowhere. He said, don't you know I was right there watching you when you ran him down and got all that stuff? He said, now Naaman's leprosy is going to be on you. And it was. Gehazi became leprous. Then not long after that, they had so many people coming in, they did not have enough room at the seminary. So they were building an addition to it. They went down by the river, and one guy had borrowed somebody's axe to cut trees down with, to build with. And he was going to swing it. It was right by the river there, where there's a lot of wood. And the axe head off in the water. He said, oh, master, said my axe head went over there, and I borrowed the axe. What am I going to do? He said, where'd it go? He said, right in there somewhere. So Elisha took a stick and laid it over in the water. Y'all, that axe head floated up. There's an iron axe head. It floated to the top of the water. He said, well, get it. And they put the axe back together and went on working. He didn't think anything. He just did what needed to be done. what God led him to do. And it was miraculous. And then I told you about the Aramean army when they came down and tried to surround them at Dothan, and they got all blinded. So we got a whole bunch of, not anything nearly as I think the army taking the whole army captive and then feeding them a feast and sending them back. That's pretty spectacular. But the rest of it is just like everyday stuff that God revealed, and he was able to go right on through it like nobody's business. Just made it commonplace. Miracles were commonplace for Elisha. No telling how much more he did that wasn't put down. Really. Now, in the Hebrews Bible, the book of Chronicles are called the affairs of the days. So Chronicles goes all the way back to Adam and goes all the way through the whole time of the king, well, the judges and the kings and everybody, and right up to the days of Nehemiah, when they came back from captivity in Babylon and reconstructed the temple in Israel, in Jerusalem. So they recorded the main genealogies. This was important. This was important to the Jews. They want to keep their bloodline pure. They still do today. So the genealogy was very, very, very important to them. Most of the focus is on Judah and the city of Jerusalem, since that was the focus of all the temple worship. It works out from there in that. So since almost all the events that you see in First and Second Chronicles were already told, we got all the stuff in First and Second Kings. First and Second Kings, they go through kind of like just tells you what happened. Very objective presentation. Now, in First and Second Chronicles, it gets into the spiritual side of it and what God's ideas were. Now, there's one thing recorded in Chronicles, but not mentioned in the other books. So, you remember when they were coming in to take the promised land? The Reubenites, the tribes of Reuben and Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, all this land where they took out Og and Bashan, and all that land of Gilead there. They took all that was good farm, good cattle land. They said, we wanted to stay over here. So God permitted it. That was not his perfect will. His perfect will was to go over the Jordan into Canaan land, get rid of those 6 tribes. Theirs was punishment. They were being punished for their evilness. They said, we want to stay over here. So you know what happened to them? They got taken captive before anybody else did. In First Chronicles 5, 25 and 26, they decided to stay on the east side. Now, Numbers chapter 32, 20 through 23 tells us when they got permission to do that. But they were carried away by the Assyrians and lost. The Assyrians were very, very barbaric people, but they were very wise too. Divide and conquer. They took all of those people from the tribes of Gad and Reuben and Manasseh, and they just put a few here and a few here and a few here and a few here. They split them all up and scattered them in among the other people, so they would almost have to intermarry with the other people. And they lost their identity. They disappeared. They were carried away. So you got a map there on page 4. I hope you can see it. I'm not sure exactly how good a copy, but the well-known body of water bordered. Okay, the Assyrians took Israel into captivity, and the Babylonians took Judah into captivity. Okay, so what body of water joined both of them, and that would be the Persian Gulf. It was southeast of both of them. The Persian Gulf was. You can see over to the right side there, the Babylonians. And then just north of that was where the Assyrians were. And the Euphrates River flowed through both of them. Nineveh, which you can see there almost at the top on the right-hand side, the Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Who preached in Nineveh? Yes, Jonah. We'll get to him a little later.
Nahum will.
What?
Nahum will.
Yes. And there were more than one. But, okay, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, and Babylon was the capital, of course, of Babylonia. And modern day Babylon is going to be revealed soon. What country is in that area now?
He knows. Iraq.
Iraq, yeah. And part of it is Turkey. But of that area up to the north there. All right. That concludes the study for tonight. Anybody got any questions? Yeah. Knowing and understanding the Old Testament makes everything in the New Testament look more clear to you. Much easier to understand when you have a good grasp of the Old Testament. Now, we're looking at it again from 30,000 feet. We're not trying to get down into the details. I'm breaking down and sharing a few of the stories that I find really interesting, and I hope it is for you too. But it's all good stuff. Questions? No? Well, I pray you all have a good rest of the week. I would ask also that you remember my wife and her three sisters. They're